Okay, Attila, I haven't met you much, but since you're a brother of Tom Napick, then we're brothers, because I'm a brother with Tom Napick. We worked really hard over the years, and thank you for coming, and thank San Diego Club for sponsoring you. Here you go.
The good, the bad, the ugly. Australia's got a lot of stories. You know, it's very difficult to sort of like put it all together and frame anything in a suitable way that suits the audience here. But I'm going to do my best anyway. So we'll start with looking at things that are good, looking at things that are bad. Then we're going to look at things that are ugly. And you'll get a few surprises in here, but let's see if we can get everything on the show and going. Some infamous Australians. We actually have introduced cacti that become very interesting in this presentation as we get on along. But before I get too far in, let's get back to some introduction. There's some people here that didn't get this morning's talk. There's Australia, the continent, and we're looking at just the fact that it's as big as the USA and it's got a lot to offer. But what do we know about it? Really, there's some problems. Okay, I showed this picture this morning as well. We have habitats that are ideal for succulents and cacti, but for some reason, I looked here many times and it's taken me a while to adjust my eyes and my thinking, and I ended up finding things of interest, but they're really obscure and they're really hard to find. So, you know, it's not exactly easy. You can't walk there and take a walk or a stroll for an hour or two and you could come back and say there's nothing there. So, you know, it's not easy. But I spent a lot of my time, not so much in the East Coast, in the greener, more fertile belt, but I spend more of my time away from the mountains and out in the fields and out in the desert in the more arid regions. And on the car now, we have a sign, Michelle and I, we have a sign on the car, Desert Flora Research. We have that sign for two reasons. The most important one's the only one I'll share with you. The most important reason isn't to promote Desert Flora Research. It's to stop pesky people who think we're up to mischief or no good. We clearly identify who we are, what we're doing, and that helps prevent farmers getting angry, police pulling us over. We're left alone to do our business. So it's very, very good having a sign like that on a car. Keeps people away. I again introduce Michelle, not only co-pilot, she's a photographer and researcher with me, and if I'm not taking pictures, she is. And you can see in the background aridity, infertility, but near the roadside, water runoff, disturbed soils, and things begin to grow. Things germinate. So it's an ideal opportunity to photograph things that you might rarely see in that sort of location otherwise. When we find something a little bit rare or interesting, of course, this was a highlight for me. I won't share what the plant is at the moment. We'll just move on because it's just trying to bring you into context with what it's like in Australia inland. And we have sand dune deserts and we have stony deserts. And I like walking for hours and hours and hours, seemingly endlessly, doing nothing, going nowhere in a hurry. But here I might find bones, human bones, ancient artifacts and things, just things. But looking at my feet, looking at the ground, you can see the stone pavements almost like it's artificial. And that's what it's like standing looking at it. And there's my feet, just to give you an idea. So no indication that any life other than perhaps ants or something in the sand between. But yeah, I could walk for hours. And Michelle too. I often turn around and I can't even see Michelle on the horizon. She's walking around somewhere doing something similar. Now, something that's rather important. In Australia, we have 25 million people. And if you were to ask most of them, including the gardeners, including the botanists, including the explorers, whatever, ask anybody, they would all say or suggest that Australia is devoid of succulent plants that are worthwhile. Devoid. This is a government sign. It's a very important government sign. And if you notice on the right, there's Australia, and the coloured orange indicates succulent diversity around the world. Australia, again, look, it's almost devoid. There's only a couple of spots. What's the problem? Why is that an indication of our succulent flora? There's a problem in interpreting what's a succulent and what's not. Now, I showed this morning, Gordon Rowley's book, famous book. There was a second-hand copy in the book, one of the book rooms next door for sale. It's my number one book from when I was young, and it helped get me really started and into the hobby. But the sign clearly points out, for instance, Australia is a continent almost without native succulents, just a handful of not particularly fleshy, mostly cosmopolitan weeds. Now, I showed this morning also, so it's very important to bring us back into what I'm talking about here. I'm now going to mostly travel across the arid regions, but the grey area is what's called semi-arid. And semi-arid areas have greater diversity than the arid areas. I mean, jokingly, just for a minute, I just want to emphasize, a desert is deserted. Obviously it is, most part, in the center, but as you leave the center of a desert and go towards the perimeter, it becomes a little bit more appropriate for plants and other things to survive. It's a grey area I like to spend my time in, especially if you go to and near the margins or where some of these desert regions merge or meet. It's interesting. So yeah, this sort of habitat for me is ideal. Now, the next sequence of images are not necessarily from arid, extreme arid regions, but I want to show you some of the highlights of things I found, highlights of plants that would be appreciated by all of you in the audience here. When I first came across this plant, I was gobsmacked. I thought to myself, this is absolutely superb. I know it's not a succulent, it's a xerophyte, but it's an honorary succulent, like yuccas. How succulent the plant is, or what part of the plant is succulent? Well, it's a cordex, and yes, it's quite exquisite, and it grows in dry, arid regions. So, you know, it's really, it's got a name. Hello, Michelle. It can grow quite tall. Some of these specimens are 3 meters tall in this image, so quite tall. Kingia australis. You know, this is a Kingia australis at the back. That's why the sign's there. And the blackened stem, that's the trunk, the base at the ground. Michelle said, look at that, something different. What's that? Let's go closer. That looks like a succulent. That looks like an aeonium or an echeveria. What on earth is that? Well, I had no idea. Read the sign. What sign? Read the label. What label? The mind boggles, but it arouses curiosity. It arouses the desire to pursue these plants further and beyond. Oh, blacker one. Aeonium's what cop? Looks like. This is one genus I'm teasing you with, but there's still no name, not even an indication as to what genus we're in, what family it is. It's one of Australia's largest botanical, one of the largest genera and family groups in Australia, one of the largest, and yet most people have never seen it and know about it. Still the same genus. Any clue what genus we're dealing with here? Anyone from the audience? No? Well, looks like an aeonium. These are superb little plants. Some are small, some are large. They two different species side by side. What contrast? Remember, there's only a handful of succulent weeds in Australia, by the way. It's blurry on the front, but at the back, it's not my picture, it's someone else's. But in the background on the right, you can see clearly a specimen that looks quite interesting. Still the same genus. What is the genus? I'll give it to you. Stylidium. Stylidium has over 600 species currently identified and hundreds still to be discovered and identified. All those ones I showed you now, from the bottom of the Kingia to these other ones in the sandplain, they're all within the genus Stylidium. An interesting aspect of Stylidium, there is a succulent tuberous root, so we're talking it does have a succulent base underneath as well. Another aspect of this genus that's very, very specific is that when it flowers, I'm not going to show you the flowers. This isn't a talk about Stylidium, so I've got to avoid that. But I need to explain that when it does flower, this plant has the ability to move. It is the fastest movement known, it's the fastest plant movement known on the planet. So it's faster than a Venus flytrap in its movements. That movement, I won't explain what it is, but it's kind of very, very special. Another thing they found in recent years is the fact that many Stylidium are carnivorous. Wow. Anyway, more things that we have that are xerophytic and often honorary succulents. These are things I've discovered and encountered, and when I've encountered them, I think to myself, why don't people share images and stories about these plants? Why don't people know about these plants? The mind boggles. These things are just so bizarre and interesting. It looks like a bromeliad of some sort. This is Australian, and yet most Australians don't see them or know about them. And my question is, why not? They're not little, they're not insignificant, they're not unattractive, undesirable. This one, oh, the bark when it gets bigger. It is so beautiful. It's so pretty. Look at the colour and the texture. Make a great bonsai. And it is a xerophyte. So yes, you can grow it with your other succulents. Honorary succulent, I call it. It's really beautiful. But what is it? Well, I'll give you a name. There it is, Tribulus, the genus Tribulus. And if you look it up online, you'll probably see pictures that are pretty horrible, and you say, that's not what Attila showed us. Well, they didn't show you good examples of the species. Now, there's a little Tribulus there on the right, lower, foreground, less than 30 centimetres high. Look at the strikingly white trunk and stem. Beautiful leaves, a bit like a Perculacaria decarii. Oh, lovely. Now, everyone might know what this is. Willemia nobilis, the rare Willemii pine. It was discovered 100 kilometres from Sydney, where there's over 4 million people. 1 hour drive from the city centre, 1 hour drive from the city centre, and they discovered a new tree forest, a forest of trees in a canyon. How could you discover something near a city so close, of trees that tower over you? You know, when I say the mind boggles, it's interesting to think that we only see what we want to see. We only see as far as our nose allows us. So, you know, the opportunity to explore the Australian continent and discover new species, new plants, new ideas, new horizons is endless. So, you know, anyway. At this point, I wish to emphasise that Australia is still unexplored habitats everywhere, plants just waiting to be discovered. Now, this is an obvious, well-recognised succulent tree that many people grow and know, Brachychiton rupestris. I saw it for sale out there in the sales area. It's obvious because you can see it from a mile away, and it's, you know, right under our nose is a big succulent tree. The trunk expands and contracts with water reserve. So yes, it is a succulent of sorts. Brachychiton, hello Michelle. Notice how huge this tree is. Its roots got access to fertility. There was a house not far away, and the septic system was nearby, and the roots got, monster. Now, that was the good of this talk. I wanted to show you pretty plants, interesting plants, beautiful plants. Now we can get into some bad stuff, a topic that some people don't like to talk about. We have, I'm exploring here, there's a Brachychiton, another species of bottle tree, not with a swollen trunk, but it's nonetheless a bottle tree species. And I'm in the far right, and there's an Opuntia next to me, an Australian Opuntia tomentosa. There are many species we have. In fact, it's not too hard to explore Australia and encounter cacti almost everywhere. We have Australian cacti, but they're not native. Of course they're not native, but since their introduction, they've spread widely, and there are various species, and some are still spreading rapidly across the landscape. So, you know, it's just amazing. Prickly pear or Opuntia species were originally introduced, you obviously know the story, cochineal. It was brought to Australia to bring with it the cochineal because the first introduced British soldiers and all, they wanted the British have red coat soldier suits, and they needed red dye to keep them red. And anyway, they wanted the cominic acid, which you can get by crushing the cochineal insect. That's a pad of an Opuntia, and there's a matchstick, scratching it, and you can see the red blood. It's actually by crushing the females, and that's actually quite remarkable. Cominic acid. Now, this is typical Australian countryside where you can see Opuntia merging and mixing with acacia and eucalypts. It's a common sight in many places. There I am standing next to them, and historically, that's in Victoria, not far from where I live, and hillsides covered in them. In this image from the early 1900s, when there was a major problem, the government panicked. But there's a gentleman in this image, you can barely see him, so I'll focus on him, showing you how towering the Opuntias are. And when they merge together like this, there can be impenetrable forests. So many impenetrable forests that, you know, the government really did panic. But let's have a look at something. This is a snap from one of my publications. Rather than rewriting it, I'm just copying it out. But on this sign, you'll notice their first sentence, it reads, curses rather than admiration. Common responses to spinescent plants. That's really interesting. Now, a genus of cactus called Opuntia, or prickly pear, spread widely in Queensland. By the early 1900s, several Opuntia species formed impenetrable forests covering an estimated 24 million hectares of farmland. Birds like the fruit and spread its seeds widely, so the government organised a bounty on the offending birds. Within months, over 8,000 emus and 11,000 ravens, crows and currawongs were slaughtered. By the third year of culling, a tally of 300,000 emus seemed insufficient, so countless eggs were smashed to reduce the emu numbers further. There is a reference there, a scientific reference to back that up, so it's not nonsense from me. But isn't that just an incredible story? Now, so a genus of Opuntia, I've mentioned the birds and the emus. So these beautiful creatures are to be exterminated because these native animals are a problem now. These native animals are being exterminated by the millions now. Over the years, it's a horrendous story. You know, we're going to end up looking like Madagascar, where their large bird has totally disappeared. But we're doing it by choice. Oh, what a shame. Even the chicks. Now, in the 1920s, a biological control, these are snaps from my book, so I've just taken a photograph of the pages rather than rewrite these sections. But in 1920, a biological control was tried using the imported moth, Cactoblastus. And over several years, the moth successfully bred, multiplied, and eventually destroyed the Opuntia from most of the farmland. The Cactoblastus Memorial Hall has been erected since. A memorial hall in honour of an insect. There are even plaques and statues in towns in honour of an insect. We're the only country in the world that honours insects like this. But there's the sign, and it's got the name Cactoblastus Memorial Hall. There it is. From the countryside has been saved. No more killing emus, thank God. But back to curses rather than admiration are common responses to spinescent plants. We don't like spiny things because they get in the way of farming and get in our hands and feet. But less acknowledged is the fact that some of these things are not only attractive and edible and useful, indeed they are keystone species in arid and semi-arid environments continent-wide. So Australia, also from just a snap image, Opuntia tomentosa near a town in Queensland, all parts of the cactus, including the fruit, have sparse covering of spines, but native birds, insects were feeding on the fallen fruit during very dry time when little else in the habitat could provide food, water, shelter in the baking sun. An abundance of spiders and webs were also found on plants and numerous mammal scats found around the base of the plant. That indicates that this introduced plant has and is providing a benefit to our Australian fauna. Now, that's something the government doesn't want to acknowledge or support because we've got to exterminate this pest plant. This plant is a pest on the landscape because it gets in the way of farming and it makes the farmland unusable. But to think that it's beneficial to our native wildlife, it's a hard thing to acknowledge, but the government won't promote that perspective. Now, there's an Opuntia under eucalypt forest there, and also besides the Opuntia, there's a red flowering something, succulent. Let's get closer. Does anyone recognise the offender here? This plant's not native. This is a bryophyllum, and if it wasn't flowering, you wouldn't see it. The flowers are rather attractive, so, you know, looking at them close, good in floristry, I think it'd be great in a vase. I love it. I've got a car vase, and once I picked up some and had it in the car for a while, it was really enjoyable. So, but it's a bryophyllum. Now, it has a common name, mother, not mother of thousands. They call this mother of millions. Why? Because the Bryophyllum tubiflora, there are numerous bryophyllums now growing wild in Australia, but each leaf can produce numerous offsets, little babies that can break off, fall off at the touch of the plant, and they just fall to the ground. And often little tiny plantlets like that, these ones don't have roots, but before long they will. One plant, a single plant, had hundreds of thousands of babies. So when they say mother of millions, over the lifetime of a plant, I'd be surprised how many children or grandchildren it would have, maybe even up to 1 million. A single plant above, some of its offspring coming up on the ground already, all over the ground, everywhere, smothering the ground. Now, there's white rock on either side of lichen. That little section of where there's not white-grey lichen is all covered in thousands and thousands and thousands of, there's Michelle's finger. Thank you, Michelle. Close up. Look how many little seedlings there are. pushing the eucalypt leaves to one side. How can any other plant possibly germinate in this crowded, so dominant plant? Look at that. Woo. All from one. So when they're not flowering, they're innocuous in the landscape. But when they do start flowering, they become very, very obvious. You know, we have ceroids, we have Stapelia, Asclepiads. Australia is rich with cacti and succulents that were not native, but now widespread. Now, this story about this farmer and his wife, they had some tin cans, old tin cans, it was an old story, and they had in it some cacti, Stapeliads and some bryophyllum, and before long it was spreading across the farmland away from the farmhouse. And at first they thought how pretty that is to have a scene of flowers instead of just barren landscape. So they loved it until it got into the field and in where the cattle were. This is toxic. The plant's so poisonous, livestock will die, not just get sick, they die. Farmer had to remove the remaining livestock off the property. The whole property became, and then it spread further to the neighbour's farm. Mother of millions, my God. It's like a red, like from Mars. It's creeping across our landscape like but only when you see it flowering. So if it's not flowering, it's not obvious. But all through the grass is probably already, that was once a thriving farm with livestock eating their grass. But you know, we call that now the bryophyllum the enemy. Also, the prickly pear is the enemy. Farmers hate it, the government hates it, but there's something strange going on, and I can't quite get my finger on it, but the word spinescent is funny because if I look at it in detail, there's something about that spinescent is the best botanical term to describe any plant feature form that forms, sorry, I've lost a little bit here, better get it right. Plants have evolved two main pathways to protect themselves from herbivorous animals. Chemical defenses, bitter or poisonous compounds in their sap, leaves, flowers, fruit, and also, or mechanical defenses such as spinescence or tangled growth forms. Spinescence primarily evolved on plants to repel mammals that would otherwise eat them, damage them, or potentially kill them. So there are two major advantages for what these plants have to keep them alive in difficult situations. Now, there are two competing, you've got a cactaceae from the Americas on the right, and on the left corner, you've got the succulent from Africa and Madagascar, the bryophyllum. It's interesting because I often now look at cacti and succulents in a really, really strange way, because on the left side here, we have the cactaceae with all their defensive spines. And now on the right, on the left-hand side here, in the left corner, we have the Euphorbiaceae. The Euphorbiaceae have poisonous sap, but they also have thorns. In a competition in a landscape, within any given landscape, which would be the winner if there was like a battle it out? Let's battle it out like in a boxing ring. Well, the truth of the matter is the euphorbia is likely to outcompete a cactus in any given situation because it's not only got spines, but it's got poison. So, you know, isn't it just fascinating? And every time I look at plants, I think of these things. I wonder about that. Now, traveling across Australia, I often can pull up and looking for native plants. There's an example of an opuntia, and it's just growing wild in the middle of nowhere. I just found it growing there. And, you know, I'm just fascinated by it because it provides shelter for animals and insects, and it's just wonderful. But the government hates it, farmers hate it, and they all want to get rid of them. And I love them. I love looking at them. I've got enough. Now, this is really crazy. You wouldn't believe it, but in Australia, we actually have what's called field guide identification for prickly pear. Field guides. Cactus field guides. Australia has now cacti growing across the continent, and you can actually buy a field guide to identify your cactus. So, you know, isn't that just fascinating? Who would have thought? Now, another government sign somewhere, and it's all about invaders. And you can see the bottom red images of Puntia. They're all the offenders. Rabbits, foxes, cats, Puntia. Let's look at the cats just for a minute, because cats, on the top it's gone, let's have a look. It reads, Australia's 12 million feral cats. 12 million cats kill 100 million native mammals, birds, lizards, snakes, frogs every year, while our 3 million pet cats kill another 25 million native animals. That's kind of strange, but bad, sad. At the bottom it reads, prickly pear is just a few of the many feral plants which seriously threaten native Australian plant communities. I, on the other hand, have reversed the story, and I actually found that there are examples of prickly pear providing benefit to plant communities. But we'll see later on. Cat thing, back just one last thing. Let's have a look. The stomach contents after a single day's hunting of one feral cat that was shot 25 kilometres north of Roxby Downs. In one cat, they found 24 painted dragons, 3 bearded dragons, 2 earless dragons, 3 striped skinks, 1 mouse, 1 zebra finch. God help us all. There's a brochure about how bad the prickly pear was and why it should be eradicated, but they accidentally put something in. Someone who wrote this and put it together and got it printed made a mistake because they wrote this in there. It reads something interesting. Another spin-off from the decrease of prickly pear was that it followed a reduction in the number of death adders. These reptiles thrived under the protection of the plant and found plentiful food supply in the form of lizards and other things, which fed on the grubs and other that fell from the pear. Now, isn't that funny? Because that brochure, they printed thousands and thousands of that brochure, and when the government noticed what was written there, they had the brochure destroyed and reprinted. Well, they had to remove this paragraph. You know why? Because it explains that there's a benefit to our wildlife. Can you see the benefit to our wildlife? At least 2 major points here, or maybe more. If you notice, it says there, the reptiles thrived under the protection. Now, if the cats are eating the reptiles, why would you want to take away something that protects the last reptiles that we've got left? Why would you want to exterminate the last reptiles and exterminate the prickly pear when it's providing a benefit? And if there's other lizards and birds and insects, why would you exterminate those plants? Anyway, we have hundreds now, many hundreds of non-native Australian species, spiny and poisonous. The landscape is changing. Do you know, in 100 years or 1,000 years, Australia will look like Madagascar. Do you know they've got spine forests? We're going to have spine forests. I'm looking into the crystal ball. I'm pretending I'm a visionary and I know what might happen down the track. But anyway, let's look at some native species that are really cool. This is a calendrinia. Going quickly, calendrinia, not much to chop. You know about calendrinia. Our species will one day be moved to a new genus. There it is in flower, a field of it. Calendrinia remota. It's in a remote place. Buses travelling through remote regions often will stop here because the tourists have nothing to see. So this is a highlight, a field of pink. They get out, stretch their legs, take pictures, squat down, having a great time. But there's things here they don't really see or photograph. In the foreground, there's something different. Now, the pretty flowers attract the eyes, obviously. But what if it wasn't pretty? What if it was interesting, but not pretty? Let's go closer. That is pretty. What's that? That's interesting. Pretty to me, perhaps, but not to anyone else. I don't know why. They get back in the bus, they move on. Oh, my God, that's native. That's native. That's native. We're looking at, this is a succulent chenopod. It's native. There's juvenile morphology at the bottom 2 sections, mature morphology, and those colourful things are not flowers. There's its name. It's actually in the family Chenopodaceae. We call them chenopods or chenopod because it's an interesting feature it has. Because you're not looking at flowers. Do you want to see the flowers? Can you see the flowers anywhere there? I'll show them to you. They're open. The flowers are open. They're so tiny, insignificant. So what are those colourful things? It's beyond the presentation, but these are succulent, native succulent plants that really, Gordon Rowley's got to come out. I know he's passed away, but if he ever saw these things, look at this. These are all native plants, native succulent plants. We're looking at a genus at the moment called Scleroliana. Scleroliana, really interesting, really weird, really spiny. There are just so many species of Scleroliana. These are all Scleroliana, 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 still Scleroliana. Now, a government sign in a national botanical garden, a government sign. It says here, Australian succulents. In the middle it says there, Australia has a small number of succulent plants. Unlike exotic succulent plants, such as cacti, our native species do not have spines. Really? Okay, that's a spine cluster if ever I saw one. Yep, they do have spines. They do have, this has got spines. This has got, vicious. Whoa. So many cute. Spiny. Still the genus Scleroliana. That was the good. That was the bad. And now, the ugly. What am I leading to? Where am I going with this? The ugly truth? Truth? Really? These spinescent Australian native succulent plants happen to harbour wildlife like never before. Important wildlife, rare wildlife, wildlife that's on the verge of extinction. These are still the genus Scleroliana. One genus alone. Oh, look at that, it's cute. Two species side by side. The contrast is so dramatic. I find these things just more and more interesting each time I look at them. Two species side by side. Another genus. There are so many. I haven't got time to show you what Australia's got to offer, but there are thousands of things like this. Thousands. And yet it's not acknowledged. Michelle taking a picture. Beautiful species. Now, a different genus. You can read the label, but it's spinescent. The leaves are very sharp and pointed. Flower. Oh, nice. And it goes in a pot easily. Now, back to the point about the ugly truth. These plants that are spiny protect its habitat. There's a spider. It's blurry, I'm sorry. There's a spider. I didn't know this image had insects in it. And when I got home, I zoomed in. I had to crop it. But there's a spider top left, and there's another creature on the bottom right. The plant was full of insect life and animals, just things happening. In the protection of spines, a cow or sheep or any grazing animal hasn't got a chance. So this ladybird is therefore protected. It's extraordinary that such plants could provide not only the habitat for the insects, but also lizards hide in these spiny thickets. Lizards and also rare animals, rare marsupials like a bilby. You know, you can't find bilbies in the wild anymore. You won't find them. You'll never see them. I've never seen them in my life. The only place you'll ever find them is in reserves. Why? Because they're all being eaten by cats. A ranger's passed away now, a friend of mine, but he's holding a bilby mature. He loves bilbies, and we now have reserves where they're trying to reintroduce bilbies where there are cat-free zones. So these are areas paid for by the government where they're trying to create reserves where the feral animals are removed, cats exterminated and so forth. But bilby reserves. This happens to be one of the world's, if not the world's, rarest bird. It hasn't been seen in habitat. There are no birds left in the world. It hadn't been seen for over 100 years. But a few years ago, 2 or 3 years ago, they actually found one hiding, and they found a new area, a real spinescent thicket in the desert, and there are actually two species. They all prefer spiny, secure places where a cat can't jump in and get at them. See the spines protecting this bird? This was, I think, the first image ever taken of this night parrot. It was rediscovered after 100 years because where it used to live, all the cats have taken them. There again, hiding under spines. That's a Triodia protecting it. This is one of Australia's most beautiful parrots, and I've never seen one before in my life, except in cultivation. But in habitat, they're so rare, and again, they only survive in spinescent thickets. So, this is the barrier between, like a war between the safe zone and the unsafe zone. Farmers want to clear the land, put their livestock on. I'm not saying farming is bad. I'm not for 1 minute thinking that farming should be removed. But our understanding and our relationship with the plants and animals that need certain habitats is not fully understood. Another animal that's so rare and so important and so beautiful. Oh, this one can look after itself. It's spinescent. It's spinescent. I wouldn't mind having one of these in a pot. It's also the ability for it to camouflage. It's in the image in the center left. I was going to use a red laser pointer to show you, but it's there, obviously. There it is. Thorny devil. I like its name too. It's got the name Moloch horridus. And when it gets excited, its eyes start to bleed. Oh, they're such interesting creatures. Now, We mentioned the feral cats and the prickly pear, but something odd. The ugliest truth of this is that where it says that the introduced spiny plants are a serious threat to Australian plant communities, I believe it's the reverse. It's the reverse. This is an example of a farm where perhaps overstocked, perhaps a dry year, but all the greenery is removed. Where are the insects and animals and caterpillars and spiders going to live and hide? There's nowhere. And how could a lizard survive? And what could it eat if it could survive up one tree? This is right across for thousands and thousands of kilometres. It's just amazing to see this sort of thing. It's just so sad. But Australia is being eaten alive by introduced animals, grazing animals that will eat anything that's edible. Now, the point I'm making here is that here you've got cows, they've stripped away the horizon, bare of vegetation, there's barely anything green. After rain, there's a few sprigs of grass. But what's that in the foreground, in the centre? That's a spinescent succulent plant, native. It harbours so many insects and things. There's so much diversity going on in that protection. Now, all the grasses and neighbouring plants get grazed down and nothing will get to flower because the plants are eaten before they get to flower. But this plant is flowering happily, it'll produce seed happily, which means it's going to spread from here happily. So it's going to retake the landscape, hopefully enough to be able to maintain an ecosystem. So spiny havens. Australia's spinescent succulent plants provide important food and habitat for animals, birds, and invertebrates. Anyway, I just skipped that. The last surviving colony of one species of bandicoot was in and around the town of Hamilton in Victoria. In Tim Lowe's book, The New Nature, he wrote, thickets of exotic gorse. Do you know what gorse is? Oh, horrible thing, gorse. Anyway, thickets of prickly gorse around the outskirts of the town proved an important refuge. A local environmentalist, John Seebeck, who became an authority on bandicoots, also recorded gorse was the principal environmental weed and a very good for the bandicoots. So isn't that interesting? There's evidence there that these new the plants that we've brought to this country are now fighting back and pushing back on farming. And now I see things differently. I see the landscape differently. I see farming differently. And when I see a scene like this, typical Australian inland arid region, there's a bit of water on the right and there's colour as a consequence. But the real voyage of discovery consists not in seeking new landscapes, but in having new eyes. Marcel Proust. So that's an arid habitat. The fertility and diversity is all centred around spiny succulent plants. All the coloured patches you see there are spiny succulent plants. Now, I'm just about finished, but Australia's spinescent succulent plants, whether native or introduced, are now integral to the conservation aspirations for future generations of humans. That's really profound, in my opinion, anyway. It's my perspective. Oh, I mentioned this morning about this blue plant. Michelle took these pictures. What on earth is it? Has anyone found out its name yet? Does anyone know what this is yet? Should I give you a name? Okay. Divisia epiphyllum. The word epiphyllum is part of its name. How nice. And so does it flower? What do the flowers look like? Finally, I have flowers. Oh, but you know, you can come across a plant like this and never see it again. In one spot, one location, one occurrence. You go back a year later or a few years later, it's either shriveled up or dead, or it's just not photogenic anymore. So, but Michelle and I travel a lot across the continent. We look in places other people wouldn't look. Old quarries, roadsides, hillsides. And while we're looking at these places, we're often walking around with a cup of coffee. So we pass through little towns, little tiny towns. And when you can get a good coffee, you take it with you in the car and sit and enjoy the view while you're driving around. When you stop at a location, you sometimes walk around with a cup of coffee like I have in my hand. And we just stroll around, just having a look at this and that and exploring. And as we're doing it, you also get this occasion where you've eaten something from the previous town, you've purchased something in the way of food that hasn't agreed with your tummy, and you feel like you want to go to the toilet, but there isn't one. So what do? Well, we head back to the car to get some toilet paper. As we're walking back, there's rubbish, it's roadside stop, there's rubbish, road tire. And we're walking back and, oh my God, you wouldn't believe it. You wouldn't read about it, would you? I mean, we're in the middle of nowhere. I mean, that's not the sort of thing you would expect to find in the outback. But you know, I didn't use it, but for the sake, I wanted to just demonstrate the opportunity was there, but I didn't use it. Michelle said, "That's disgusting. Don't show anyone this picture." Anyway, she said, look, my stomach doesn't feel too good either. Maybe I'll wait till the next town, the next stop. Maybe so we'll get to the next stop. And we drive down the road. We're heading down the road. And we knew there was something about a half-hour drive and away where we could perhaps pull up and there's a toilet. We can use a proper toilet to sit down. And we found it's a campground roadside area. And we pulled up and there's a toilet block. And Michelle went over first. She wanted to use it. I went in the bush, by the way, at the last stop. I didn't use the toilet. I went in the bush. But anyway... she went over, she used the toilet, and she came back to me later and she said, "My God, it is disgusting in there." But she took some pictures, and I went back and had a look in there too, and I took more pictures. There's a sign on the wall, and I got to read you the sign because it was quite nice. The sign reads, "Please don't block this toilet. Use the iron bar to push any stuck waste down the chute so that other users can feel it's safe to use. Thank you." Now, that's the star picket, the fence picket to push it down. I was standing there taking the pictures. I said, "Michelle, I'm not going to use this toilet. I'm going back out into the bush." Wow. But anyway, what am I doing here? I'm sorry. Now, I found a place and I lifted a rock and put a rock over it so my business was hidden from view, but I love nature and getting out there and at night sitting around a campfire looking at articles, stories, reading, looking at my photographs, taking notes. And as it got dark, I put a headlight over my head and I'm still working into the night. Michelle took these pictures and out of nowhere, while I've got a book open, there's a page with a bit of greenery on it. This insect was hungry, a katydid, I think it was. But it went off in disgust. It thought, "Oh, that's not edible." But what a lovely, lovely experience to have happen to you. I felt quite privileged. So what am I doing wrong now with this remote? Got to move on. So it headed off in disgust. Now, just a couple of pictures. Kelly hasn't told me to get off yet. So I'm sorry. But, how's my time? Do you have a few more minutes? 5 minutes? Oh, good. Okay. Just exploring here and there. We love exploring all sorts of locations. And we find things that just really are interesting and highly succulent again. There's things here in this image. Let's get closer because what on earth are we looking at? I don't know. Well, I do now, but not at the time. I was just impressed. I was just like thinking, wow, this looks like Africa. This doesn't look like Australia. Gordon Rowley, where are you? Now, these things are cute. They're not very big, but that brown thing in the back, well, I've found the name. It's euphorbia. But what species? Most of us here are aware that euphorbias typically have caustic and potentially toxic sap to protect them from herbivores. There's that thing again where I'm seeing things really differently. In a world that changes, there's change around us all the time. I can imagine succulents will be eaten. We've now introduced millions of goats. And goats will be the last cleaner-uppers. Goats will clean everything the sheep and the cattle left behind. But if it's poisonous, I'm thinking to myself, that pretty succulent you saw with the blue and red leaves that'll be eaten down, it's not spiny, it's not poisonous, but the euphorbia was poisonous. So I've got a feeling that will be something of a survivor that in time will spread more across the landscape. But curses, rather than admiration, are a common response to spinescent plants. And it's funny because I see them as beautiful and important now to conservation is a funny word for me, and whenever I'm having a conversation about conservation, it's nothing like what most people talk about, which is really strange. I feel quite but when I mention Madagascar and I mention how Madagascar has a lot of spine forests. A spine forest, in my opinion, evolves because all the edible things have been eaten. All the soft things have been taken. So spinescent plants move in or evolve to survive, and they provide and harbour an incredible diversity. And lemurs survive as a result of spinescent forests. So lemurs exist and chameleons exist and survive because of spinescent forests. So I see the Australian landscape evolving and changing, and I see that one day, if we're not careful and looking after things, we'll either lose the animals and insects to overgrazing, or we'll have the spiny plants come out in their defence. That's what I can see from it all, but anyway. So that's more or less it for me, I think. Again, that euphorbia. There are euphorbias all around Australia. But again, you know, I had no idea. These are euphorbias. You can obviously see the identifying characteristic, which I'm now aware of, but not when I first encountered them. Just euphorbias. Just euphorbias. So we have no succulents, huh? So that's it. I'm getting hungry. I'm done.